by night, and as a hobby for the last 20 some odd years, I've been working on the quantum field theoretical explanation of reality and so on. And so this came as partly driven by the desire to understand reality for myself. Very much from my point of view, it's been something that's been driving me since I was a little kid. And I enjoy sharing that with others, because I believe that modern physics says things that are quite profound and very relatable on a human, personal level. And I hope to be able to contribute that. Simulating human decision-making with quantum mechanical tools could sound just very scary, but I'm going to try to introduce it to you again based on value judgments that we as humans make, and relate those value judgments to your inner experiences as you're making those judgments. Why? Why do I do that? Well, let's start with very practical matters, which is that there have been tests on tens of thousands of people in asking whether they like Gore or Clinton or Bush or what they think about celebrities. And these were collected by people in quantum cognition, and that data was analyzed. And that data has shown surprising effects. For example, that the response probabilities in sets of questions do not add up to 1. The Bayesian probabilities don't add up to 1. That there's interference between questions based on their order. So if I ask you about Clinton being something, and then I pose a guy who's even more something, right? Then maybe the guy that's second will not look as bad if I first asked you about Clinton, but if I ask you about, let's say, somebody who's very good, like for example, ethics and morality. If I ask you about Clinton first, Clinton might not do so well. But if I take somebody else who you may not respect very much and I say, please tell me about the ethics and morality of person X, and then about Clinton, then all of a sudden Clinton might get a little bit of a better perception in your mind because of the order. So that's the interference of that. And people are influenced by other people in the way they answer. So what was observed is that we're not just boxes. You don't ask us questions to which we give answers. If I see a friend next to me, or if I know a certain group of people will be looking at what I say, I will change the way I answer. These kinds of things are not answered by standard models, and by these I mean mostly Bayesian rational actor type of models. Okay. Especially not if the artifacts are concurrent. In other words, all of these things happen to the data. There's evidence of all of these effects, not just one of them. And finally, 4, so the reason we do it is because the quantum formalisms explain these artifacts without having to add anything new. In other words, what I hope to convince you of is that the quantum mechanics and specifically quantum field theoretic mechanisms already account for all of these effects inherently without having to modify the math or add any new weighting factors or any new features or so on, as the Bayesian or rational actor theory would have to in order to account for it. Of course, we'll get to the bigger picture. Okay. So now that we're motivated to use the quantum tools because they seem to be better adapted to understand human cognition, the question was, well, how do we practically do it? So the practical application is a simulator, in other words, an algorithm, which we have built. So quantum cognition in that algorithmic kind of a form was inspired by these discoveries, and I have listed just a few of the fathers of it, but it's a field that started in the early 2000s. There's Ertz, Atmansbacher, Blutner, Bruser, Busemeyer, Gabora, Graben, Krennikov, Potos, Sassoli, DeBianchi, Trueblood, and Wong. You probably have heard some of those. We propose a map that's in line with quantum cognition to simulate human decision-making and explain all these results that I told you were anomalous. We want to do it in such a way that it gives you, as an individual that participates in decision-making, a way to infer possible evolution of your own internal states or internal feelings. Although I will not formally call them that, but nonetheless, this will try to track your inner space. And we will reverse the approach of trying to derive meaning from facts or decisions. Instead, we'll try to make sense of decisions after estimating what kind of meaning or value or worth they have to the subject. In other words, if something is irrelevant to the subject doesn't even care about it. It is pointless to try to compute how they feel about it. It doesn't, so to speak, register in their world. And so there could be things which, so in a sense, if there is no inherent meaning, if the subject can't make meaning of something, then we do not simulate it. That thing doesn't occur for the subject. And finally, we will also account for social influences amongst the subjects as part of the model. Now this step is a little new. This involves what people call quantum entanglement. We'll get to that towards the end. So the first thing I want to do is build up these tools to try to understand something that we all experience personally and that is being confused. And I don't know about you guys, but I get confused pretty often. And so I decided that confusion itself is a worthwhile subject based on which we can explain how we're going to implement this algorithm. Okay, so now about how I'm going to do it. We will look only at the internal states of mind of a single subject first, before we talk about groups. And it's going to be just prior to making the decision. It's not going to, the act of actually making the decision, we may get to later. It's called measurement. We may or may not get there. I will use cartoon conventions to denote what happens inside the subject. So I will draw those bubble clouds where this guy is thinking this or you're thinking that, because it's very helpful. I will use no equations. Now, if any of you want to know what the equations are, or you want to know where it's coming from in the actual corpus of quantum mechanics, feel free to ask me. Maybe even later, but I don't want to detract from this from the present presentation. So there's a lot to cover. If I just said you can ask. If it's short and to the point, please do. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a picture, like a cartoon-like picture. Here we have a subject. They face a proposition. The proposition includes an item called money. We're all familiar with those kinds of propositions. And now, this money can be looked at many different ways. For example, if you're running for office, you might look at it purely as what kind of constituency it can buy you. If you're looking for money to pay all your arrears because you're up to here in debt, you'll be looking at it differently. If you're looking at it as a banker to help you multiply your money, it's still different. And if you just care about going shopping to the local mall, it's still different. So what I'm trying to get across here is that money is not money to you subjectively until we have chosen this value. And to make a little bit of sense of this choice of values that you're going to apply in making sense of the item or the proposition about the item. For example, the proposition is, here's $100,000. Okay. Now, how do you want it? If you're a banker, you probably say, hey, wire it to my investment broker, right? So you will act things out differently. But in order to make sense of it, we'll try to associate the different values with axes. Literally these lines. So there's value axis 1, value axis 2, 3, 4. And different ways of valuing something subjectively will lie on different axes for now. So this is just a picture to help our minds to keep track of the fact that the item needs to be valued according to some value before sense can be made of it to the subject that confronts this item. Okay. So these could be all kinds. These could be, by the way, in this particular case, proposition about the item is presented as subject as a 30-day interest-free loan of $100,000. Okay. Very pragmatic, very practical, right? What do you do?
Do you have a finite number of values?
It's actually infinite.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. SU2. Mm-hmm. It's the full SU2 group. At least in QED. Sorry, I'm probably like this. So now, we just covered that. Is everybody okay with assigning values to axes? Okay, then let's move on. I'm giving.
Понимаете первую фразу?
So,
Что субъект не может думать о деньгах в разных ценностных системах или что?
В одну.
so
In compatible ways.
sure.
Он это самое.
Несовместимых.
Он не может думать о значении денег.
On nie może думать we wszystkich, sorry, in all possible ways at exactly the same time, but you can hop and go through all the possible ways of understanding money, just not simultaneously. Okay. So what I want to get across here is that there's a certain now that we've agreed that we will assign values to these axes that live in the mind space of the subject, we want to explore the relationships between those axes. So, I just assigned perpendicular lines or perpendicular axes to value 1, 2, and 3 from the previous page, meaning that they're completely incompatible. And then, as you pointed out before, there's still other axes possible. I mean, any direction in this sphere is a possible direction for a value. This value happens to mix a little bit of value 3 with a little bit of value 1, and maybe a little bit of value 2.
Right, but it's not fully correct comparing with human being. Consciousness could not be not three-dimensional.
Right, this is just a picture.
Mm-hmm.
This is just something to start making sense. I will address that a little bit better later. Yes. So the idea is that values can range from compatible to completely incompatible. So this value is almost compatible with value 3, but it's not very compatible with value 1 or value 2. So literally, I want you to think geometrically about these values. If your value is to spend money going shopping versus going shopping specifically for cars or car racing, then it's kind of similar to just shopping. It's probably somewhere close. But if you view as money as a purely a vehicle to make money, like an investment banker, you value it purely as capital, then even thinking of going to the racetrack to blow a bunch of money to race a car or to go shopping is going to be incompatible. It doesn't mean you can't go there, as somebody correctly observed. You can change your mind, and after a certain amount of time say, you know what, I don't want to be a banker anymore, I just want to go to the racetrack. Right? So we experience this in our own minds as we shift the value based on which we evaluate the item.
One more small question. Can I ask?
Sure.
You see, да, по-русски спрошу, вот эти три values,
Yeah.
они как будто конкретного человека взято, или ты взял in general, like general social three values which should be incompatible for everyone?
Good.
Understand the question?
So, right. So to some extent, this is an experimental question. We don't know for a fact which cultures and which values are fully incompatible in a certain context. One way to test.
But you are trying to put that.
Yes, yes, I know. But one way to test it is to see whether you can envision yourself spending that same money while holding on to two of those incompatible ways of thinking about it. Okay, that's how you can test it.
Ну, разве...
So you have $1, and you
Yeah.
either get to spend it to feed your child or to go shopping. And you can't spend it both ways, right? So this is not merely an act that occurs purely in your mind. At the end of the day, you got that money and now you get to spend it. The question is, what do you spend it on? According to which value are you going to spend it? So if you spend it, again, if you spend it as capital, you don't have it available to buy groceries.
But, ну, разве capital не дает мне больше social power? If I am very good capitalist with lots of money like Trump, I already have the social power.
Sure.
Ну, значит, они compatible.
Some of them may be compatible, some of them may not be compatible. Again, this is for you. For Trump, okay, we'll get there. Actually,
Okay.
that's the next
Well,
slide.
хорошо.
That's the next slide. So, I can't introduce everything at once. Your question will be answered. I'm trying to introduce slowly just the concepts for now. So bear with me. For now, all I need you to take away from this is that there are relationships between the values that you can use to assess the item, and some align better and some don't align at all. Or I call those incompatible, the ones that don't align at all.
Geometrically perpendicular.
Exactly, yeah. So that's how I'm using the geometry of space to help us capture the fact that those values are incompatible, and some are more or less compatible. Now, there's one more thing, and that is that there will be a minimum amount of effort that will be required to change your mind, especially to an incompatible one. So let's say you're really fixated on this money to use it for buying a business. And now you want to change your mind and say, no, I'm going to buy groceries and help my kids and my family and send them to college, send my kids to college. The amount of time or effort or whatever you want to call it to switch from one value to the other one, especially when they're incompatible, is associated with what I'm going to call minimum and mental effort. For those that know quantum mechanics, that's actually Planck's least action. In fact, it maps exactly to least action. So right away about Trump. The question is which meaning realm is Trump's ball in? Right? To him, you're right. I mean, so this doesn't apply across the board. It applies to individuals. It applies to their realms. And so when we put together a simulator, we have to basically add up people who inhabit similar realms. I mean, I could say same socioeconomic class, although I hesitate to even boil it down that much. But they have to conceive of those, let's say, of money. I mean, if I give a $100,000 30-day free loan to a billionaire, he's probably not even going to call me back. It's not even going to register. It's probably not even in their realm. They probably think of. But if I offer it to somebody who is $50,000 in debt, right, and needs to buy groceries and pay bills and alimony or whatever, you've got a problem. I mean, this person probably will call back. And if somebody is just a small-time investor and they think they can make money faster than they have to pay back the 30-day loan, they can look at it as capital for their business, right?
I have a question.
Yes.
In this case, aren't we talking just about one subject? And how can one subject have multiple meaning realms?
Right. We are talking about one subject. One subject can potentially jump. Right, you're right. Very good point. Usually they inhabit one meaning realm. But as you grow, let's say if you're a child and then you become an adult, you can inhabit different, or if I give you $1 billion, your relationship to money will fundamentally change.
I see.
You see what I'm saying? And so you will no longer be in this realm,
Right.
right? So that's why I said socioeconomic class, for example.
Okay.
You will be in a different realm. And in that realm, the axis and the values will be different. Okay, and to your question, they have to be explored for each cohort. So the values, the actual orientation of the values have to be explored for each cohort or each realm in order to set up the simulator to run properly.
So you do kind of statistical values model. Statistical values model and compatibility also, you statistically.
Uncompatible, right.
And you choose values statistically, and compatibility of these values you also do statistically.
Exactly. Actually, I'll get straight to the chase. We use the old-fashioned commutator algebra. In quantum mechanics, how do you figure out a space and its dimension, commutators, anti-commutators, residuals, same math, nothing new. And exactly right, that's exactly what we do. So you get a preliminary data set, you run a calibration on it, you discover the orthonormal conditions, you set up a provisional set of axes. Right?
Понятно вообще, о чем я спрашиваю?
Sorry, that's kind of fast. Is this?
По-русски, пожалуйста.
Сейчас, shortly, in order to
You can say it in Russian, yeah.
Значит, мы говорили о ценностях, соответственно. Я все пыталась понять, имеется в виду ценности одного конкретного человека взятые или общая как бы выборка. Оказалось, что все-таки статистическая выборка ценностная, и ценности выбираются статистически, и то, как они друг относительно друга ориентированы. Это понятно, да, что ведь
такая
у меня
группа,
они
деньги тратят на покупки и не тратят на сбережения.
да, и они у меня могут быть как бы перпендикулярны, а могут быть, в общем-то, параллельны две ценности.
По-разному.
Что?
По-разному.
Да, и этот вопрос они как бы индивидуально не решают, они просто статистическую выборку более-менее среднюю. У кого-то они вот перпендикулярны, у кого-то нет. Понятно?
Понятно. Okay, great. So, when the values are in the same meaning realm, then the subject can change their mind between those values, and they reside in that realm, as we covered. Just want to make sure. And it is within that realm that this minimal mental effort is expended. The other mental realms are, in our construction, not available to the subject. In other words, they literally just don't see them.
Unconscious.
Unconscious to them. Just like to Trump, probably the feeling of being $100,000 in debt, well, actually, maybe not. that may be a poor choice. But to me, feeling like, George W. Bush would be, I have no clue what he feels like when he confronts his daily life, or money for that matter. So once we have partitioned the space, found out the realms, and found the relationships within the values, now we can establish a hierarchy, as in here. So it's a hierarchy exists between meaning realms, and certain realms may be, again, inaccessible to a subject depending on their condition. Okay. Next.
Что такое propensity, кто знает?
Wave function.
Wave function
Yes, or
from
state
quantum
vector.
dynamics.
Yeah, quantum. Yeah.
Probability function.
Yes, exactly. Probability amplitude. Sure.
Вероятностная
Волновая функция,
то есть
да.
propensity.
Some people call it propensity. So maybe I should jump straight to it.
Inclination. Okay.
How would it correlate with probability?
You have to square complex conjugate it and square it to get probability.
Получите комплексную функцию.
Right.
like math.
Same thing as the math. So I'm trying to teach this without math, but bear in mind the math is just right under the surface. So I'm going to try to do justice to the subject matter without any equations. But if you ask those kinds of questions, then
Thank you so much.
that will be the answer. So yeah, you understood. Okay, good. So subjects. So now in that we've only been talking about the values and realms and compatibility and incompatibility between values. Now, here's the first slide that shows you how we will keep track of how a person is feeling or thinking about it. So, and to designate this feeling, we assign a vector, and the vector for this person, since we know that that's their subject personal value axis, we've introduced it before, they feel affirmatively, meaning yes. If the vector were pointing down, it would be no. To those that know quantum mechanics, these are spin states. I'm just using straightforward SU2 spin states, right? That's exactly what it is. So, now this vector is not a real vector. It's just a propensity. It's not, it's even prior to probability, right? So this state